Hi, Dr. Dave Webster again in my ongoing video blog series on the travesty of patient access to PET-CT in the Ontario government's liberal so-called evidence-based healthcare patients first system. This is the third in my series of videos on looking at the safeguards which you might believe actually still are there to protect you from politicians and governments and their bureaucrats and experts here in Ontario. Maybe you'll have a different idea once you finish this series of videos, but this again is my third video now series in looking at the ombudsmans. I've talked about Mrs. Amaral, the first ombudsman, Mr. Andre Moran, and you can go back and look at those videos if you haven't. We're now going to deal with the current ombudsman, Mr. Paul Dube, and the deputy ombudsman, Ms. Barb Finlay. Now, what I want you to consider, I mean, here we see in the Toronto Sun an article, "I am here to help," Mr. Dube, and Barb Finlay again talking about the teeth of the ombudsman. So again, are they really the teeth and there to protect you? Or again, the question we're asking is whether they are they watchdogs or simply lapdogs for the government? Now, my first involvement with Mr. Dube came in, you'll see, April 2016, and this is a letter I sent to him, and the title of the topic was the complaint against the previous ombudsman, Mr. Moran. And basically what I asked him, a little politically incorrect, was that the question I will pose to is whether Mr. Moran is acting as a watchdog or a lapdog for the government of Ontario. And we'll keep a timeline here. This is April 2016. So I immediately got a letter back. You're assigned to an investigator. In this case, it's a Mr. Gareth, or Mr. Jones Gareth, I guess is the name actually. So he responded to me and said they'd get right on it, of course, April 2016. Now, you'll notice here, this is now August, and I have been behind the scenes, keep asking, so I'm getting nothing back. I've sent you all this material and so on. And now August, what happens is I do finally get a letter eventually that will come at the end of August, now the 31st, I believe, and we'll see what what the letter basically from Mr. Dube and Mrs. Finlay was. They simply vomited back the conclusions that Mr. Moran had come to, and that was that my colleagues were utterly confused. I mean, their role was to, look at, not to look at policy once it's in place, and broad policy on things like such as PET. Their job was to evaluate the process by which these policies were established. Again, if I could have predicted the sun was coming up, I could have predicted the kind of people that the government has working for them. Mr. Dube, now Ms. Finlay, would of course say. So this is now September 2016, and I've written to Gareth again and simply said, did you get my letter? What I had now responded to their letter, and this letter is now September 2016. You can see here September 16th, and it's to Mr. Paul Dube and Barb Finlay, and essentially I'm responding to their letter, and I'm going to raise a number of questions about their conclusions. The letter I will put up on the Facebook site at some point, but if anybody wants it, I'd be certainly happy to send a copy of it. But essentially what I was asking him was, as you'll see, really portrayed in the first complaint here, point of clarification. I want you to be very clear and very specific, and using quotations from my letter and the documents I sent to show exactly why you concluded that I thought your role was to investigate matters of broad policy, public policy, rather than me challenging the process and the manner by which the Liberal government evaluated PET to determine its policy and what would be included under OHIP funding. And I had the right to actually demand an explanation from them, because in the past I wasn't really only except for with one instance, the last major one with Moran, I didn't instigate it, so I couldn't demand answers to it, of course. In this case, since I had initiated the investigation, they had taken it unofficially. Surely I should have the right, you would imagine, except we're now realizing what Ontario is really like, and the government and the politicians that we've elected, that I should be entitled to get a response. So the second, or point 3 here actually in that letter is, again, I wanted them, they're also proud, of course, of what the government has done on PET, and they've dismissed all my concerns and the colleagues and so on. But again, they buried this report from public access, and I'm saying, okay, fine, if this is your conclusion and you're so confident about it, and everything is so pristine and there's no concerns here about process, that surely you'll want to release your investigation and that of of Mr. Andre Moran, and of course the original investigation by Mrs. Emerald. So we're now looking here. There's no response, of course. So I sent my registered letter. You can see November 22nd. And again, I'm asking them now by registered letter formally to the government, will you respond? And you'll see that's November 2016. So now we move forward to, you can see here, January 2018. And this again is now my second registered letter to Mr. Dube and Ms. Finlay, demanding that they respond to my concerns. I mean, it was my investigation. You simply regurgitated the same ruling, but provided no explanation or documentation to validate or back up their position. So their response came in February of 2016, and you can see here we have previously responded to your concerns regarding the investigation to Mr. Moran in 2009, including Ms. Finlay's letter in August of 2016. We do not intend to respond further. Interesting, right? That's so much for the transparency and accountability of the government, but more importantly in this case, the very people who present themselves as there to protect you against the politicians, their bureaucrats, and their medical experts. So we're back to the original question. Is Mr. Paul Dube a watchdog or a lapdog? Is Ms. Finlay, the Deputy Minister, a watchdog or a lapdog? You can decide for yourselves. Now, the next video is going to be particularly important because it's going to be regarding the patient ombudsman, which was put in place by the Wynne government and Dr. Hoskins, and this person here, Ms. Christine Elliott, we'll have a lot to say about her. And of course, she will be running for the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. So we obviously need to make sure, I would suggest, that she doesn't get to be our next premier for reasons that will become obvious. But what you will, I believe, finally realize is that Ms. Elliott, she's going to take the efforts of the Ombudsman's office to help this agenda directed at her patients to an entirely new level. So I'll have that video out hopefully shortly, and let's make this an election issue. And what I'm going to do is put up a couple of suggestions as to how people might actually respond. It's fine to see all this information. I mean, I've got lots of solutions that I think would benefit everybody. So, and as I said to Ms. Wynne in July of 2016, I'd like this to be a win-win for Wynne and help. I agree with much of what needs to be done in their policy on trying to, stop the ordering of useless tests and so on and so forth. But it can be intimidating, of course, for how do you respond. It's fine to say, write your MPP or call them. And maybe one of the things I can suggest is that you actually, write something down and then send it to my email, and then I will spearhead it for you or make some suggested changes and present that on your behalf rather than that. So I'm going to come up with a few ways that, we want to make this happen. I'm sure everybody supports what needs to be done. The question is what realistically can you do, and I will have something to say about that. So thanks, and thank you for your support.